What's up, everybody? Blake the Scholar of Magic here, and today's purpose of a video is to find out all about Mutate. So I'm going to bring you kind of through what I know about Mutate, like what set it came from, what other sets had produced some Mutate cards, and how has it been impacted from some of the newer sets. And I'm going to try to do my best to kind of explain the mechanic to you today and why it is a worthwhile mechanic to kind of investigate and learn more about. And it will help you also learn more about magic rules in general. So if you like this type of content, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. I'm almost at 500 subs, guys. I appreciate it. So what is Mutate? Well, it is basically a card mechanic that was printed in the Ikoria set. And this is actually a dice from that set. This was basically the icon that was the hallmark of that set. It was a fantastic set. It was released during like the COVID era, right when all those things started to kind of go down. And it was a great kind of distraction from all those things and brought a lot of like Godzilla treatment and arts. And the set itself was gorgeous. It had a very powerful land cycle and triomes. And overall, the theme of just like beasts was just it was a big hit, and the card quality was there, and Mutate did not hold back. It brought like a lot of like powerful things to Magic. It definitely supported some previous mechanics such as landfall. It was just kind of served as a very, very creature-centric, very green-centered type of base, I would say, in terms of sheer power of creatures and such. So, what's a good like way to start off with Mutate? Well, let's like this kind of explain like what can you mutate and what is Mutate in general. And I think a good way to kind of look at this is let's look at a Mutate card here, such as a Sawdust Demolisher. This was printed in one of the commander sets from Ikoria, not from the base set itself. So that's why it has a different mana symbol. So this particular card is basically a 6 mana 6/6 with trample. That's what it is by itself, right? As a normal casting cost card, that's what it is. But it also has this shaded, this little mechanic here in gray called Mutate for 3 generic and 1 green. If you cast a spell for its Mutate cost, put it over or under target non-human creature you own. They mutate onto the creature on top, plus all abilities from under it. Probably the one of the more interesting parts about this is it does have to be a non-human. One of the things that can get you when you first probably learn about this is you might try to mutate it over one of your human cards, and you just basically won't be a legal move. You're like, well, what's going on? Well, that's because it has to be a non-human. So that's any non-human creature you can mutate onto. Now, what else? Basically, what you can do is you have the option once you successfully cast this card to put it over or under the creature that you're mutating into. So how does that look exactly? Well, for instance, let's just imagine we have this card here. And it's a very strong card on face value, right? Trample, 6/6 stats, creature beast. Whenever this creature mutates, destroy target non-creature permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Very powerful effect in general. Obviously, that is a nice effect to be able to destroy a target permanent, and that's just basically anything but non-creature permanents, so that could even be lands. So that's a really nasty effect in itself. Also, trample is a nice keyword, and 6/6. So let's compare this. Let's imagine that we are going to have a Scoot Swarm on the battlefield. Scoot Swarm is a really interesting card in general because it will start duplicating itself once you have you reach the criteria 6 lands, and you're putting more and more lands onto the battlefield because it will just basically copy itself. This is a really good way to illustrate how powerful Mutate is. So for instance, in this manner, I have the option of either mutating over or under, like so, correct? If I was just to mutate under the card like this, it would remain a 1/1. However, it would now have the ability to trample. So that's something interesting, that keyword from the Sawdust Demolisher is retained for both of the creatures. In addition, this is also now has the types of insect and beast. So that's kind of interesting as well. I believe that is how it works. We'll talk about legendaries and such like that as well in a moment, but I'd actually, let's just say now that it is considered just an insect token or insect creature. We'll talk about characteristics too, because that's also a part that I kind of want to discuss. So it is now this 1/1 insect with trample. Okay, so that's kind of interesting to know. And now when it makes copies of itself, those copies will also retain the trample as well. So that's interesting. Now, but what if we go ahead and mutate on top? What we'll be left with is a 6/6, basically a 6/6 trampler, and it will still retain the characteristics of the text box underneath it. It will still retain the characteristics that whenever land enters, and if we control 6 or more lands, we'll create an additional Scoot Swarm. Now those copies of Scoot Swarm will actually be considered this card on top. It will retain all those characteristics. So instead of just making 1/1 tramplers, now we're going to be making 6/6 tramplers. And that is a massive payoff for mutation. So what's the drawbacks of mutating? Basically, you can get 2 for 1. Basically, you're putting 2 cards together. So this Sawtooth Demolisher / Scoot Swarm can just be, taken down by a Doomblade, for instance. Any type of single target removal will just absolutely wreck this card if it doesn't have any protection of any kind. So that is kind of like a drawback of mutate, but you can see if we are just getting this off and we have that chance to just start producing lands at a good rate with this mutated on top, that amount of 6/6 tramplers is going to be just too hard for an opponent to overcome. They're simply going to lose faster than not. So that's probably kind of just a wombo bombo combo we have. And I do want to kind of explain some more facets. Really, that was kind of a good introduction. I think when mutate kind of gets a little confusing is the creature type. This text box in particular, and how this is retained and not. Also, how the name is retained is also something that we can kind of discuss as well. So that's a kind of a little foray. That's just a really nice combination here. So Tamiyo is one of those really interesting cards that I was kind of just kind of investigating in my mutate journey. I was just kind of curious about how the rules kind of interacted with it. It is not a human, so we can mutate over this. Let's just imagine that we are going to mutate the Sawtooth Demolisher onto this for whatever reason. And with Tamiyo, basically with her, she will exile herself after she draws a certain amount of cards. Now, what I thought was interesting about this card, and I wanted to test it out, and I read it up on Reddit, I wanted to know about the verbiage, because it says when you draw your third cast card in the turn, exile Tamiyo. And I was curious, if I put the Sawtooth Demolisher on top, is this new melded card still considered Tamiyo? I mean, it's called Sawtooth Demolisher, so is it still considered Tamiyo or not? And the answer is yes. So it still retains that name characteristic, at least on the top. What it does lose, and what you have to realize what it does lose, is it loses this text box here. It is no longer considered legendary, and that is a massive part of Mutate. Mutate gets around a lot of legendary rules and basically shenanigans with copying legendary creatures, because if you mutate over this, it's no longer considered that legendary creature. It does no longer have that legendary status, or I believe the Moonfolk Wizard status is either. It basically loses the legendary status altogether, and it becomes this new card in general that's only considered a beast. However, yes, it's still considered Tamiyo. And I did test this out on Arena too. I met the criteria for drawing cards. And what happens when a card such as this, and in certain circumstances, you're going to, when a card leaves the battlefield, it, for instance, this, you would imagine this would pop back on the battlefield or not. In this circumstance, the card is just basically exiled altogether, so you actually lose it. You lose that melded card, and you just get the Tamiyo Planeswalker, which is still a good card. Don't get me wrong, it's still really decent. But in this particular instance, you do lose it. So it is a very interesting kind of mechanic. I just kind of wanted to illustrate also in this manner, what if you were, curious about how these mechanics stack, it would also retain the flying as well. So for instance, anything that melds together, basically they retain the characteristics of the text box. It's like a growing text box. You see it like this. You want to see it kind of just looking like this, where the top card retains the stats. And that's kind of how you want to see that. So this is if it goes on top, it is a 6/6 flyer trample, and it has these abilities still when Tamiyo Inquisitive Student attacks, investigate, blah, 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 blah. So overall, really interesting little facets here so far. Let's keep moving. Let's keep rolling through. I want to just kind of put this here, this newer card from Final Fantasy, because you could see like it would be great to like mutate onto like a creature like Tifa. We'd love to have Tifa like have like 6/6 base stats. The issue with this is that she's a human, so we would not be able to mutate onto Tifa because she is a human. So I also wanted to kind of illustrate that and kind of, that might be a killjoy for some cards, but there's a lot of support for mutate in general, so it's not too worrisome, but that would be just a really cool thing, but she is a human. Also, with mutate as well, what you also have to realize is that cards like the Great Henge kind of lose their value, which is kind of sad because the Great Henge is an exceptional card. The thing about mutate, though, is that when you mutate over a creature, say, for instance, you have a Tamiyo on the battlefield already, if you mutate onto the creature, that creature doesn't enter the battlefield in that manner. Rather, it just fuses with the other creature and mutates onto it. It doesn't actually physically enter the battlefield. It doesn't enter the battlefield triggers in that manner. So a card like Great Henge, which asks, whenever a non-token creatures enter the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. Yeah, you could see that it's not actually entering the battlefield, so that's unfortunately not going to work. So Great Henge, I wouldn't say is the best card for mutate, just because you are going to be mutating onto so many creatures at once. There are some cards though that and the fact is it has to be non-tokens as well, right? So we won't be having too many creatures enter the battlefield in that manner. So yeah, the Great Henge isn't really the best card for mutate, unfortunately. Okay, so how about a card like Whisper Silk Cloak? Similarly, like this with like Lightning Greaves would be kind of a good illustration to demonstrate how some cards are just really good like for some decks, and maybe they're just not so great for other decks. So for instance, like a Whisper Silk Cloak, equipped creature is unblockable and has Shroud. It can't be the target of spells or abilities. So when we mutate onto something, we are actually targeting it. So if you had like a particular creature that had a Whisper Silk Cloak attached to it, you would unable to be mutating onto that particular creature because it was shrouded. And it can't be targeted spells or abilities. So that is how that kind of circumstance works out. Still a great card altogether. However, let's go over a card that it would work with. Mutate is like fair game for cards like Swiftfoot Boots. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste, so that's fantastic, right, guys? Hexproof is not like Shroud. Hexproof means that it just can't be the target of spells or abilities that our opponents control. We are able, if it is the things that we ourselves control, we can target them. So Swiftfoot Boots is like a perfect mutate card. You're going to love to just slap this onto a creature and go hog wild onto that creature itself. It's probably one of the more powerful cards in general for what we're doing. So just kind of love to see the Swiftfoot Boots in action. I also kind of wanted to illustrate Felia. This one is an interesting one. I feel like I definitely wanted to speak to this one because I think in circumstances where I have had mutated cards and I have utilized Felia on them, and they basically would split. Like they would basically become their base forms again. So say, for instance, we had a Sawtusk Demolisher and a Scute Swarm mutated onto. And for whatever reason, we wanted to bounce it. I think probably one of the better, kind of ways I've seen this is like you can imagine if you had like a solemn simulacrum or something and you wanted to get that enter the battlefield trigger the solemn once over again. And one of the ways you could do that is to bounce like a melded like solemn simulacrum with Felia and have that solemn simulacrum enter the battlefield again, apart from itself, basically unfuse its mutate and enter again in separate base forms. Because the thing about mutate is if something is bounced, it won't return as like its mutated form. It will be separated in a certain manner. For whatever reason, I think the Tamiyo basically exiles that particular card that was fused with it. And I believe for Felia, just the way it is worded, I think it basically returns those cards separately, not as like a single planeswalker. So that's kind of an interesting one, and that's kind of like a very, I'd say, more confusing part of Mutate, but I am quite sure that's how it worked. If you guys in the comments want to kind of weigh in on this, but I'm pretty sure I have that understanding correct. And I definitely wanted to kind of bring this to the table and kind of, this is educational for everybody. So I do think, though, that is exactly how that card works, and that's how kind of bouncing works in general with Mutate. So there is Felia. So that's another cool one to look at. Let's look at the cards that just are just absolutely just value bombs with our particular mechanic of Mutate. We talked about hexproof before. What if we just have a creature that has hexproof itself? Obviously, it would be very powerful. So a Slippery Boggle would definitely be a card you would want to consider for your Mutate decks. The fact that you can just simply mutate onto this thing and have it be untargetable by your opponents is extremely powerful. This could just be your hub for mutates, and you can accrue those mutates over time. One thing that we can kind of talk about with mutate, and we'll get a little bit into it, is that mutates do accrue. So once a card is mutated, say for instance you have a Sawtusk Demolisher mutate on Slippery Boggle, and then we mutate, for instance, an Auspicious Sterix onto this same card, these same cards here, then the mutate will again trigger once more again for the Sawtusk Demolisher and the Auspicious Starks, which has its own unique mutate. So that's very cool. So yeah, if we could have like a card that's kind of a hub that's, hex-proof in that manner, that's definitely what we want to see. Paradise Druid is also one of those really nice cards. It can act like a mana dork in certain circumstances in the beginning of the game, and then it can just be like a hub for your mutates, whether if you don't need too much mana, you just need something to be protected, and Paradise Druid has hexproof as long as that's untapped. Fantastic. Again, there's Swiftfoot Boots, they're just redundant. I just had that in there. There it is again. What are the cards that like to be mutated onto? So here's some that I've kind of just discovered that just really benefit from like upping their stats, hitting a little bit harder in circumstances. These are the cards that are going to just love to be mutated on. Of course, they're all non-humans. Tiny Bones is one of those awesome ones, like a 1/1 Death Toucher that if it gets in, if it becomes harder to deal with and interact with and attacking, then we can start accruing value from getting our opponent's graveyards. That's fantastic. Dreadhorde Arcanist is one of those other cards that you love to see its base power grow. Basically, this card, when it attacks, it will see its power and basically be able to exile an instant or sorcery with lesser, equal or lesser power than the Dreadhorde Arcanist, and you can just cast that without paying its mana cost. It's insane in the membrane. And it has a good keyword itself already in Trample, so that's crazy. So yeah. Cold Eye Selkie is that other card that just is going to love to, be playing against opponents that have an island. And then you can mutate onto this, a high-powered creature, and then all of a sudden you have like a honeypot where you're just swinging in on that opponent and you're just drawing like 6 cards because you have a 6-powered mutate card on there. And it's just a crazy card in general. Obviously, this is like a more risk-reward. You don't have like innate protection in this 3-drop. It's a 1/1, but you can see just having this thing mutated onto and getting stronger is very good for us. Venerable Warsinger is another card that loves to be mutated on. Look at those keywords already. Vigilance and Trample to start. Whenever Venerable Warsinger deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of damage Venerable Warsinger dealt to that player. That's crazy in the membrane. So yeah, it's just like a sweet reanimator, card. And of course, it loves to like be made stronger with the cards that have higher base stats. Helga Skittish Skier. This is probably one of the nastier cards to mutate onto in general. It sees the casts of mutate, which is fine because mutate is considered a cast. So each time we mutate a card, like say for instance we mutate I'd say probably a good example would be like a Brokos, Apex of Forever, and say for instance we mutate on that onto Helga, then Helga will then just become a 7/7 on top, and then it will be able to produce 7 manas of a single color all of a sudden because its power is so much higher, and it will just keep accruing cards. So Helga is just an amazing card engine and also just a mana engine in general for us. Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. This is a nasty thing to mutate onto, of course. As I explained earlier, if you mutate on top of these legendaries, they lose their legendary status. So this card will no longer be considered legendary any longer, and you could go ahead and mutate again and again and again. You're going to want to wait till when your opponent reaches their end step. In that time frame, you're going to start accruing all those mutated copies of Kiki-Jiki, and you're going to be able to win the game. And that's not a very high mana investment either. That's just, we're on like maybe, turn 5 or 6, it looks like. So pretty sweet stuff there. Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief is one of those cards that basically demands its own commander deck. I mean, you can simply build Mutate off of Ivy if that's what you wanted to do, or just targeting her, targeting in general. Basically Ivy's going to love to see other creatures that are targeted. And for instance, I just keep bringing up the Sawdust Demolisher. Imagine you have a Paradise Druid and an Ivy on the battlefield, and you go ahead and you mutate the Sawdust Demolisher onto the Paradise Druid. That Paradise Druid is going to become that 6/6 Paradise Druid, now with Trample. And Ivy will also give you the option of copying that same Sawdust Demolisher over her, so she doubles your mutates. That's fantastic. We love it, guys. We just love to see it. Frontline Heroism is another card that's going to double your mutates as well. And this is kind of why we want to play. You want to kind of see and kind of investigate what colors you need to play to really make these pop. So far, if we want to play both of these cards, we need to play in Teamer or red, green, and blue. If we want to like kind of expand that even further, obviously I think five color mutate is where it's at, and because you access to all the mutates and of course all these sweet cards. But again, this is basically just going to double up your mutates. It's actually going to create a token. When you mutate onto something, it's going to create a token, and that same spell that you just mutated something on will mutate onto the token as well. So double mutates. Vesuvian Duplimancy doesn't double your mutates, but it actually will double the creature that was there already, and it will not be considered legendary. So that's a really epic kind of spell. I think I love mostly what I love to do with Vesuvian Duplimancy is like I love to like duplicate like a Blossoming Tortoise, and then kind of go hog wild with the ramp and the consecutive mutates from that. That's kind of one of my favorite things to do. I love to just like copy like things with really nice enter the battlefield characteristics that aren't too expensive on curve. Like I just think a Blossoming Tortoise is like a perfect little start there. But it'd also be fun to like do Vesuvian Duplimancy on would be like a Galta, And we'll play this in like my 5-color Omnath mutate deck because it is just cool in that way. It is cool to have like these very strong enter the battlefield characteristics, and that's kind of what Vesuvian Duplimancy illustrates. You definitely want to take advantage of enter the battlefield cards. Stormchaser Drake, additionally, is that card that loves to see mutates. And this one actually prefers to be mutated on as well. So whenever Storm Drake or Drake becomes a target of a spell you control, draw. Fantastic, draw a card. Love to see it. Season of Growth also loves to see your things getting targeted. Whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. And I did not explain Vesuvian Duplimancy very well. Basically, Vesuvian Duplimancy and Frontline Heroism, they just require that single target creature to be be mutated on in this circumstance. So yeah, just a single target. Whenever a spell targets only a single creature you control, which mutate does, then you get to do this. So the extra mutate for frontline heroism. And whenever you cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of the artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. So yeah, just love to see that verbiage of targeting and single target. Whenever Storm Chaser Drake becomes the target of a spell you control, draw a card. And Season of Growth, this also lets you scry too. When a creature enters, whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. So let's look at the mutates. So these are all the sweet mutate cards, and I've just ordered them in terms of casting cost. Sea Dasher Octopus is one of those fantastic 2-drop mutates. I'd say I value mutates as their casting cost. So if they have a low cost mutate, those are my favorite mutates. If they just have a good mutate payoff as well, that's just even better. But more often than not, I just value low mutate cost cards, because if we can start having an abundance of low mutates on some of our higher, payoff mutate cards that have that are higher casting costs, then we can get into some really powerful stuff. So Sea Dasher Octopus is a mutate for 1 generic, 1 blue. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. It also has flash. That's nice. Parcel Beast is that 2 mutate, just beautiful card. We'll never be casting this for its 4. That would be a disaster. But we'd love to, mutate onto something for that green and blue. What a fantastic. We just love these low mutate cards. This one actually doesn't have a bad effect when it mutates. Whenever this creature mutates, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. That's really nice. Migratory Greathorn. This is that awesome landfall payoff. It's probably the most appealing mutate card out of all of them. The stats aren't so bad when you mutate. It's on curve with your Birds of Paradise, and even your Delighted Halflings, for instance. It's just a really nice card, guys. You just get that ramp, and then the more times you mutate on it, it just keeps ramping. So for that low 3 cost, whenever this creature mutates, search your library for a basic land card, put on the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. Okay, so what happens if we put a mutate on the stack, such as we go to cast a Migratory Greathorn, but the creature that we are wanting to mutate onto is targeted and removed. We actually, the Migratory Greathorn doesn't fizzle, actually. Oddly enough, that card that you were targeting was targeted, and that's no longer a legal target, so it'll simply enter the battlefield in that manner. So that's kind of an interesting, concept of sometimes when we have certain spells instants or sorceries and it loses a target, it will fizzle the other characteristics of it. But with mutate, what happens if that card is removed? It just will simply enter as itself, but it will not get the mutate. You'll just be left with a little 3/4. So I did want to illustrate some of one of the more kind of oddly enough more obvious things you can do with mutate, and it's I think it plays very green in that manner. It just does so well. In terms of imagining with your Vesuvian Duplimancy or any of those cards that can continue to garner more and more mutate value with a Migratory Greathorn. A card like Lotus Cobra gets so much stronger because you have your lands entering for the battlefield already on your normal turn cycle, and then you have this thing mutating and creating lands, and you're making these a little bit stronger too and more resilient if you are mutating over Lotus Cobra. So it overall is just a really nice kind of play style to play landfall, and play some certain landfall cards in general. So a Lotus Cobra is just very nice, especially with that. Nissa also works very well, just with seeing additional lands. It also seeks elementals, and most mutate cards are elementals, so you'll be seeking those out and getting even more nice cards in your hand. Blossoming Tortoise, again, is one of those ones I mentioned that I just love to copy with a Vesuvian Duplimancy, for instance. I love that card. It builds a graveyard, really fantastic. Lumra is just also that amazing enter the battlefield card. You would just love to use a Vesuvian Duplimancy on your Lumras. It serves this play style so well. Morag is also a good landfall card in general. And I think what we'll do next is maybe talk a little bit more about landfall, because I have a lot to say about that as well. But I just wanted to kind of show you how this deck kind of fuses itself, like two ideas, basically landfall and mutate. And basically our chef du jour is Omnath, Locus of All. Royal Elemental is that also amazing, just elemental. We had mentioned that with Nissa. But yeah, that's just like another sweet. So that's why we kind of want access to all the colors too, so we can play all these sweet landfall cards. And this one's actually from like the original Zendikar, like years ago. Yeah, 2009. Regal Leosaur is, we're back to like just our mutators in general. This is just a fine 3-mana mutate. No worries. And it has a low casting cost, so we love that. It's just easy castable. It's okay to cast our low cost mutate cards, because we can like start mutating onto, getting creatures down for like Ivy, for instance. We don't want to be empty-handed with an Ivy on the battlefield. Here's Vulpikeet, and we love flyers too. We love to have that keyword on our mutators. This is just a low 3-cost mutator that puts flying on something and then scales it up. Fantastic. Gemrazor is that one that when it mutates, it destroys an artifact or enchantment. Fantastic. Here's Insatiable Hemophage. Once again, these are just all 3-mana mutators. This one accrues a lot of value because it will give your creature death touch, and it'll start basically draining your opponents for life as well, as the amount of times this has been mutated. So that's a nice one. Cavern Whisperer is pretty decent overall. Just the fact that you get to hit all your opponents with a discard is fine. Your opponents will probably think you're the arch enemy, but it is what it is, and it's a low cost. Basically, kind of into the middle of mutates. You don't want to like exceed these high cost mutates unless the creatures are really, really good, right? Evercool Phoenix is fantastic because it will grant flying, and whatever. Basically, it just makes something that can return from your graveyard. Like, we're going to make that token, that one generic token, and if this thing gets removed, we can just bring it back to the battlefield by playing one. It will be tapped, but at least we have something to mutate onto. It's fantastic. One of my favorite mutate cards, guys. Here's Necropanther. Also, this one's similarly pretty good because it will just return a 3-costed creature right from your graveyard to the battlefield every time it mutates. So that's cool. Boneyard Lurker is really cool because it will return any permanent card from your hand each time it mutates. So it does has a 4 mutate cost, kind of like in the middle, but it's just really nice, just to return stuff, permanents to your graveyard to your hand. It's just value. Cup Warden will make tokens each time they mutate. And I like about this is it also has lifelink. It's really cool. So if you put like a big beater, like a big flyer on this, you're just kind of like a nice little, a nice flyer that kind of can give you some life back. Dreamtail Heron, this is a really nice low, I'd say this is a decent, very decent mutator because you get flying and a card each time it mutates. That's fantastic. Pouncing Short Shark, we also love cards that interact with our opponents. So mutate for the 4 on flash speed, meaning you can do it during your opponent's turns, which is nice. It will actually bounce a creature back to their hand when you successfully mutate that. Otrimi's nice because each time it deals damage, combat damage to a player, return target creature card with mutate from your graveyard to your hand. That's fantastic. Vadrock, Apex of Thunder. This will actually, each time it successfully mutates, will return a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. Fantastic. Snapdax, Apex of the Hunt. 5 mana mutate here for this bad boy. This thing is a nasty mutator. I love it that it gives double strike, and each time it mutates, it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker and opponent controls, and you gain 4 life. My favorite thing to do is to put this on like a Tiny Bones, and then all of a sudden our Tiny Bones is going to take out a creature because it's going to deal death touch damage instead. So each time we mutate onto this new fused creature, that mutate with damage will be death touch, and it'll just take out a creature, and giving it double strike so you get double chances of value. Fantastic. Brokos, Apex of the Hunt, just a nasty card from your graveyard. Always nice to have a backup plan, and having this guy like hang out in your graveyard is just really nice. It's just like a mutator that's just like kind of always present, ready like to be like hooked up and get you some mutate triggers. So we love that you can just cast Apex Brokos from your graveyard using its mutate ability. Mind Leecher. Whenever this creature mutates, exile the top card of each opponent's library face down. You may look at it and play those cards for as long as they remained exiled. Fantastic. I like how this gets like some nice value. You know, it's just a really nice one in general. It's value from the top of your opponent's libraries, all of them. So that's a really nice mutator. Kind of a higher cost. Get flying though, and then you get access to those cards each time it mutates. Chittering Harvester, really nasty card, really, to like mutate onto this and have each opponent sacrifice a creature on each instance. That's really strong value. We love that card. Auspicious Hysterics is probably like one of the better mutates in general. This card is just like a house. It is absolutely devastating to like have an Auspicious Hysterics and having like those aforementioned Lotus Cobras or Nisas of the world on the battlefield, because this thing just returns permanence in general to your battlefield as many times as it's mutated onto whatever it's mutated onto. So if you have a creature that's already mutated and then you mutate this sucker on it, it has a chance to, at the very least, bring some really good permanence on the battlefield. It could even be like a Galta. It could even be something like this. But at the very least, it will bring back lands too. And we love all that. We love all that value what it could bring to the battlefield. So the Auspicious Hysteric is the best card in our deck for Mutate. Let's see what else we got working here. There is a card here. I think I already put it in my deck. Let me just see here, though. I'll just mention it because it is one of the more amazing cards. But Aluna Apex of Wishes, I actually just have like my own deck that's kind of designated for this card already. So that's probably not why it's not on this pile. But it does a similar thing to the Auspicious Hysterics, where it will find a single non-land permanent. So it excludes lands in that instance. It's similar to the Auspicious Hysterics, and it's just a one-off. It doesn't like stack, but it's still really good. You know, you can get into like a Crater Hoof, for instance, but it will be more exclusive. It won't consider lands, so you won't have those part of the basically exiling cards from the top of your library. You will not find lands. You'll just find basically the juice. You'll find like creatures, enchantments and such, just non-land permanents. So Aluna is also very good, and I believe that's a 6-costed mutate. I think Archipelago is pretty decent. I think it's on the higher side, but you're definitely going to want to like find a way to reanimate Archipelago somehow, you know, from on an earlier turn cycle, not pay its full casting cost, and then mutate it on with like lower casting mutates. That's when you're going to be living your best life with this card. And you're going to be stunning all your creatures, your opponent's creatures. They won't be able to untap. Really nasty thing. Nethroi is also really cool. This card will just basically mutate onto a single creature, and it will bring back a mana value total of 10 based on creatures you have in your graveyard right onto the battlefield at once. It's fantastic. It also has those nice keywords, Death Touch and Lifelink. So Nethroi is a very cool card for Mutate. And basically the card that kind of brings it all together is Omnath. So this was kind of like our little kind of action today. I wanted to kind of just show you some of the sweet cards, and hopefully you enjoyed that. But this is basically our mutate feature, and we were just kind of showcasing all the sweet mutate cards and the mutate mechanic in general. It is a very interesting mechanic, and I still feel like probably a better rules summary should probably follow eventually. Hopefully this kind of serves as a nice little kind of entree into it. In this manner, you could actually, not be too worried about some of the major components of this mechanic, and you'd be comfortable in kind of like exploring it yourself. So I hope you enjoyed some of the cards that we featured today. If you did, make sure you hit a like and comment. And I'm also going to be giving away a whole commander deck at 500 subs. So let your friends know. Make sure they subscribe to the channel and just make a comment on a video until we hit 500 subs, and they'll totally be they'll definitely be eligible for this sweet Baltier and Fran vehicle that we just put together. It's gorgeous, guys. You love to see this. So it's a really nice one. I loved it. It basically is under $200, so Pretty good value, just like a great casual deck. You can just stomp on your friends with like battle cruisers and stuff. So there's that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and stuck around. Have a great day. Goodbye.